That's a nice picture. I was like, you get the baby smiling.
I know, right? I was like, should I hang this up somewhere?
When did you get that picture taken?
Christmas 3 years ago. So she was like just under 1, so she's now 4 3/4 now. I can't believe I got almost a 5-year-old.
It's a nice picture, Kevin.
Yeah, I'll just put that here. You'd be scared.
Nice family.
Thanks.
Okay. So this week I'm going to be, I have a YouTube account that I was going to put our video on.
Oh, great. Yeah, I was wondering about that.
I have an extra YouTube account that I'm not really using, so I'll put it on there. Test, test.
And a 1, and a 2, and a 3. Do I peek out at all? Do I distort on it when you ever listen back?
No. It's funny. It doesn't sound distorted at all, but I will turn down the volume just a little bit. But
yeah, as long as I won't be quiet. Actually, let me get a little closer. Yeah, as long as I won't be quiet like that one episode.
okay. Okay, so okay, I can stop that. Okay, this is Country Dog, City Dog, episode 15.
Correct.
Episode 15, the pledge drive. We'll do a special episode on the pledge drive. In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Thanks for tuning in. You are listening to Country Dog, City Dog. My name is Kevin.
And I'm Don Merrill.
Hey, and thanks for tuning in. So today's a good episode. Let's talk about public radio and pledge drives.
And community radio. Public radio and community radio are kind of in the same category. They're kind of cousins. They are nothing like commercial radio, which is kind of on the other dark side of radio.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Because, well, commercials are... Well, you know, you can't really say that either. Because in community radio and public radio, a lot of the money that's raised from advertisers and sponsors, it's called underwriting. The Federal Communications Commission said that in exchange for not having to pay a lot of stuff, like taxes or license fees, community radio and public radio can't call the money they get from sponsors and advertisers, they can't call them commercials. They have to call them underwriting. It's sort of like a wordplay kind of thing, but it's necessary because otherwise commercial radio stations feel like they're competing.
Okay.
And so they're having to pay for a lot of the stuff that community and public radio stations don't have to pay for because they're called community and public radio. So consequently, the advertising can't be called commercials, they have to be called underwriting.
Would that be something similar to if you're watching a TV or a movie, a TV show or a movie, and you see the actor kind of something, for example, hey, I gotta go home and wash my shirt and cheers. You're like, okay, that wasn't really a commercial, but
Right.
he just gave a little
product
endorsement.
placement.
Yeah,
Right,
product placement.
Yeah, so it's something like that. But you know, community radio like X-Ray, you know, they need people to listen and they need people to support. They need people to send in money and support. So part of what this show is going to be about is sort of talking up the virtues of why it's important to contribute. And whether you live in the country, or whether you live in the city, whether you live in the rural parts of the state, or whether you live in the urban parts of the state, public radio has a pretty wide reach.
That's right. So it's worth noting that KXRY is a non-commercial Class D radio station in Portland, operating under the name of X-Ray FM. It's a mixed format, progressive, independent radio station with broadcasting with progressive radio and culture programs and music of a wide variety. And that's what makes this radio station great, is just exactly that, the wide variety of stuff that comes into X-Ray.
Yeah, now I don't really know a whole lot about X-Ray. I didn't really know about X-Ray until probably a couple of years ago, because X-Ray just sort of like popped on the scene. But apparently there had been a lot of work involved in getting X-Ray up and running. And Kevin, you know a lot more about that than I do.
I love it. It's one of my go-to stations. Everywhere I drive, it's on dial number 2. As I'm driving, plug it in, and I'm hearing great talk radio in the mornings, political and a variety of things. And then as the evening comes, I listen to the music stations and the variety of things that it just makes it a great tuning in station to listen to.
You know, the FCC has it so that stations can pick their own call signs. And people know X-Ray by X-Ray, but its official designation with the FCC is KXRY.
That's right.
And they probably got that KXRY, randomly. The FCC probably assigned it randomly because there would be no other station in the country that would have KXRY. And so somebody clever at X-Ray said, hey, let's turn XRY into X-Ray, so it make it easy for people to get. But stations sometimes they pick their call signs as a way to get people to easily recognize them. Like there was a station in Seattle called KPLU. So KPLU went through all kinds of issues, and what happened was the station was about to be sold, but the community rallied and bought the station, and they changed. They applied to the FCC for a new call sign. And the new call sign is KNKX. And that spells connects, as in the station connects to the community.
I like it.
Right? For people who listen to public radio and they listen to OPB, if you listen to Fresh Air with Terry Gross, Fresh Air is from WGBH in Boston. GBH is the location of the transmitter in Greater Blue Hill.
Oh.
So there's lots of things that go on in radio. Explains why radio is the way it is, why it operates the way it does, and anyway, getting back to the whether or not you're listening to the station in an urban area, whether or not you're listening to it in a rural area, whether or not you're listening to it online, which also could be in an urban or a rural area. The reach of this station is pretty broad.
So I'm curious, do you think that the messages that public community radio provides, do you think urban communities resonate more with those messages, or do rural, or do they both connect with the messages that is provided from community radio?
Well, community radio is different from public radio in that community radio tends to be more locally focused. It tends to be, and its messages tend to be very progressive. There were two people who were involved in sort of like creating the personalities of public radio versus community radio. Lewis Hill, for people who in community radio know, he was sort of like the pioneer for helping establish the personality and character of community radio. Lewis Hill believed every person has a voice. That means every person in the community has a right to have their voice shared to the community via the radio station. That was Lewis Hill's vision. Bill Siemering was the person who helped create the character and personality for public radio. And he believed that he believed in something similar to Lewis Hill, but he wasn't as individual focused. He was more like community focused. Like the community had a right to support itself and get its messages out. Whereas Lewis Hill was more focused on the individual. But community radio and public radio both have very progressive messages. They're both focused on issues of diversity. They're both focused on issues of income inequality and racial harmony and progressive economics and the kind of things that in an ideal world a healthy and functioning society would be able to exist. In the rural areas, there are plenty of people who live in the rural areas who love the messages of community and public radio. But as we've sort of touched on throughout all of our episodes so far, there is a divide between people in the urban area and people in the rural area. People in the rural area, I would guess, tend to not embrace community and public radio as readily as people in the urban areas.
Well, you being our country dog, So I don't believe X-Ray FM is out in Beaver Creek where you are. What would be your community radio station that you listen to out there?
Well, I could name a community radio station, but I'm not sure that would be a good idea to do. Only because that station, that station has been around for a little longer, and it has more power because it has been around long enough to where the FCC has granted it progressively increasing power levels, right?
Sure.
So that's just a matter of time, and over time, with good behavior and enough money, stations can also upgrade their own power. What I can say is I do wish that, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners who listen to KXRY do wish that it could be heard in some of the areas other than, Manzanita and where it's listed, in the station ID.
Rockaway Beach.
Rockaway Beach, right? Yeah. You want to be able to think that the station can be heard far from those transmitters. Fortunately, the station can also be streamed live. So no matter where you are, you can stream KXRY over the internet and hear some of the great programs you were talking about.
Yeah, go into X-Ray, X-Ray.fm, and you can scroll through every show and every past show and see what's going on in the future. And one thing that I feel community radio and public radio also serve is not necessarily just the local events that are going on, but world events, and something that is important, because without public radio, I feel we can almost become a propaganda state. For example, I heard just before the war in Russia, all public radio
the war in
I'm sorry.
Ukraine.
Correct.
Right.
The war that Russia started in Ukraine, all community radio was no longer allowed to talk about the war, and if they did, they ceased to exist. And then it became a government-funded state radio and state TV that would only push out their message that it was a special military operation, because public radio was not allowed to clearly speak their mind and freely. And so the power of having community radio is just so important.
Part of that power comes from being in a country where the government recognizes the rights of free speech. Free speech is a double-edged sword in the United States. On one hand, free speech, fighting words, get people shot, get people killed every day. People not feeling like they're being respected, people feeling like they're being disrespected, that turns into fighting words, which turns into gunplay a lot of times, or fist fights, or road rage, or whatever. But on the other hand, free speech is sort of like a self-cleansing agent. It's sort of like free speech sort of like keeps everybody up to speed. Everybody knows what everybody is saying. Everybody hears everybody else, and so in this society there's very little that's hidden. Because everybody is always in everybody else's ear. So, in that way, free speech makes us very, very powerful, and in a way, much stronger than, totalitarian regimes like Russia, who are afraid of their people being able to think for themselves, like China, like so many other countries in the world that clamp down on their radio, clamp down on their newspapers.
Well-informed societies always thrive.
That's right. And they're messy, but they have a tendency to thrive. And the other part of it, besides being in a country where the government supports it, the other part of it is the money. And that's where we get back to talking about commercial versus public and community. So the commercial stations, they go to advertisers and they get money, and then in exchange the advertisers get their messages put on the radio. Well, the same thing happens with community radio, but in community radio, the relationship is less, and this is even different between community and public radio. With community radio, the relationship really is closer to the community. You, dear listener, are the ones that the station is talking to when they're asking for money, because they figure that you are the one who is benefiting. Now, of course, you can turn on your radio and you don't have to pay anything. That's one of the weaknesses of the model, is that you can turn it on and you don't have to pay anything, and you can think, I can get it for free. But see, there's a moral component to this, because they think, well, if you are getting something for free, you wouldn't teach your children to take stuff for free. You don't expect that your mother taught you how to take stuff for free. So if you're getting something and it has a value, then the thinking is you should probably pay for it. And I mean, it kind of puts it in your face.
Yeah, it's almost as some people that watch Netflix and HBO and Hulu, you have to pay for that in order to even receive it. But you can't really do that for a radio station. You just, the way it's set up is that you just tune in and there it is, and it's ready for you. And that is the beauty of radio right now. But yes, the importance of pledge drives are just vital to keeping those going. You know, I was just reading on the origins of pledge drives. According to the New York Times, back in the 1960s, Hudson Stoddard, the vice president of WNET in New York City, it was a fledgling public TV station that went on air to ask viewers for donations. They needed to survive. They needed those viewers, and PBS back in 1975 created its first coordinated pledge drive called Festival 75. They were offering programs like the 1975 Ski Jumping Championships and An Hour with Joan Baez, and I think that event went on to bring in about $5 to $6 million. In today's standards, that would have been around $24 to $29 million, respectively. So pledge drives need money to support the radio stations, to keep giving valuable information, valuable content, to keep, for example, that well-informed society to thrive, and to grow.
And I know people who watch public television, which is another separate thing, another separate public thing in the public broadcasting world. Public TV, their pledge drives can last for 2-3 weeks. And, I mean, pledge drives are painful. They can be painful. I mean, just call it what it is. It's like, I mean, a lot of complaints about pledge drives is like you're taking my show hostage, you're being, I'm listening to a good interview and all of a sudden you guys just sort of stomp in, and say, hey, we need money. And, you would be surprised what stations across the country have done to try to make pledge drives more palatable. They've had hosts get drunk on the air. They've had hosts give away puppies. They've had hosts give away iPhones and trips and all kinds of stuff. They have had pledge drives that only last a minute. They've had no pledge drive where they say at the beginning of the pledge drive, look, we know, we're having a pledge drive. We're not going to talk about it again until the pledge drive is over. Some people say, oh, that works really well because then they put it on the listener to have responsibility. Some stations are like, no, we don't trust the listener. And so they have a break like every 5 or 6 minutes to remind you, hey, don't forget, hey, we're still here, hey. And it can be annoying. But if you don't do that, if you don't contribute to these stations, then here's what happens. A lot of times stations get money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Some stations get money from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the entity that supports both public broadcasting and public radio, and to some extent community radio. So they get money, and the money is like in the form of a grant, okay? The money comes in two ways. You can either get money yourself, you can generate it yourself, like this station is doing through its pledge drive, or you can get money that's granted to you from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. But that money really is almost kind of like a matching fund. So you have to get as much money or more than what they're giving you. And then they expect you to raise, so much money, every year or every quarter or something. The problem is if you don't raise that money, if you're not able to raise enough money, then they start to penalize you because you're not hitting the target they think you should hit. And if they penalize you long enough, then they start holding back money. And if they hold back money from a station that has a steady budget of financial need, then pretty soon the station goes out of business. The station goes dark, silent. For radio it's silent, for TV it's dark. But when the station goes silent, it's because, they lost their funding. And that's when you hear stations, that's when, you tune to a station and the station's no longer there. And you don't want that to happen to too many public or community radio stations because, as Kevin was saying, those stations provide a point of view that you don't really hear on commercial radio. You know, they provide you information that you're not going to hear anywhere else. They provide you with information you're not going to hear in another country.
Yeah, what I love about, so I've donated to community radio stations, and they offer a free gift. I still wear a beanie to this date on those rainy days because I donated, and sure, there was a little bit of a guilt trip that was kind of thrown at me and all the listeners to donate and how important it is, but guilt trip or not, I recognize the importance that I want to go into my car, and that's when I listen to radio most often, in my car.
Right.
I want to feel assured that I'm going to go tomorrow morning, tune in, and my favorite radio stations will still be there. And if there's a little bit of a guilt trip and they're going to offer me something in return, you know, they're going to ship me off a beanie or a shirt, then I love it, you know, good for them.
Right.
And it's a little bit of free advertising. I'm walking around as a little billboard for their radio station.
Oh man, tote bags.
Yes.
That's the thing, tote bags, coffee cups, scarves, hats, you know, that kind of advertising is just like, it's golden. Because people can, because you're doing two things. First of all, you're telling everybody else, I listen to community radio. I listen to KXRY. I'm a badass. The other thing it does, though, is it does give the station a lot of free advertising. A lot of people carrying those tote bags around. A lot of people are seeing, you know, KXRY's logo, you know, and they're thinking, "What's KXRY?" And that's how it works.
That's how it is. What I'm curious about, and Don, you might have a great answer because you wrote a great book called "Pledge: The Public Radio Fund Drive." I'm curious if a fine person from rural Oregon were to drive here and listen to our community radio, or if I, you know, living in Portland, were to drive out to rural Oregon and just tune into their local radio stations and just hear the local news and the local, you know, opinions on what's going on in Oregon and America, would it be that far off? Would there be a big difference?
I'm not sure. As far as I know, there are three public radio networks in Oregon. There's the network that exists around Astoria, KFUM. There's like three stations that are sort of like in a little satellite network around the northwest part of the state. And then there's Oregon Public Broadcasting, which is the 800-pound gorilla for Oregon. And then there's Jefferson Public Radio, which is out in the eastern part of the state. So between and then there are all of the individual community radio stations. Like there's a whole bunch of community radio stations along the coast from here down to, you know, Medford, I think. And then there's KMUZ, which is the station in Salem. So all those stations and their satellites probably provide pretty good coverage throughout the state. And because all of the stations are kind of ideologically similar, I don't think that you would hear that much of a difference. However, it is worth noting that, for instance, for public TV, for example, in public television, there have been a couple of incidences where parts of the country did not air certain episodes because they felt that those went against community values. One was where an episode of Peppa Pig, where Peppa Pig had two mommies. And that episode did not air in some southern states. A couple of years ago, it was Arthur. Arthur had a friend, or Arthur had two daddies. That episode also did not air. Because, you know, stations, you know, sometimes they're under pressure from their community, from their boards. Because all these stations are run by boards of directors, right? All of them are native nonprofits to their states. And so as native nonprofits run by boards of directors, you know, they are subject to, you know, pressure. Those boards, they have to raise money from the community in order to help the stations. And if you make those people in the community mad because you cross a line that the community in general doesn't want you to cross, then, you know, you're not going to get the money and you can't risk that.
Sure.
So sometimes stations have to bend, you know. And then, you know, you sort of get to the question of, well, you know, is journalistic integrity being compromised? Is the mission of the station being compromised for money? That is another big question for community radio and public radio, you know. But for the most part, stations do everything they can to protect their station by maintaining their integrity, because the listener is not stupid. The listener listening to this station right now, they are smart people. And that's who X-Ray is going after. They're going after the smart listener who thinks critically, who's aware of the world. And those people aren't dummies. They're in the audience and they're listening to the station, they're listening to the quality of the programming, they're listening to the messages that the station is putting out. And if the station varies or wavers, they're going to be all over the station. And so that's a good thing.
Sure. Oregon's Congressman Blumenauer, he said public radio is also an essential part of emergency warning systems and provides critical safety information in real time. He's saying that public radio plays a vital part in the lives of Americans, but nowhere is it more evident than in rural America. He went on to say that public broadcasting is a critical institution that educates, informs, and inspires, and nowhere is that more important than in rural America.
One of the other big arguments about public radio, community radio, whatever, is that the money that those stations get from the federal government comes from taxes. And there has been an argument that, people who don't support the mission of public radio, who don't agree with the messages of public radio, shouldn't be forced to pay taxes to something they don't agree with. And so that has always been a big fight. That's one of the sticks that opponents to public radio bring to the fight about why public radio should be defunded or community radio should not receive any government support and all that other stuff. That fight goes back and forth. It was going on as far back as the Nixon administration and as far recently as our last president. So one of the reasons why community radio and public radio continue to survive is because, bottom line, is it provides something that no other medium in the United States provides. It provides it consistently, it provides it professionally. When the producers at KXRY come to work every day or send in their programs every day, they are bringing their A game, folks. And you know it. So they deserve, even if they're not getting money directly put in their pocket, the station that helps get them on the air and get their messages out, they absolutely deserve your support. So with that said, I'm thinking that, is there anything that we want to say about this particular pledge drive? It started on April 3rd. It's going to go until Saturday, April 15th. Kevin, what do you got to say about this one?
I would say if you are loving what you're hearing, whether it's Country Dog, City Dog, or the wide plethora of great shows going on, please, I think it's a great time to support this station and support any community radio station that you have a favorite and you're constantly listening to. X-Ray FM is definitely one of my favorites, and it's something that keeps us entertained and educated and informed, and it's nothing but good.
And something else, a lot of the community radio stations, public radio stations, they operate out of colleges and universities, okay? So more than half of them work out of colleges and universities. Now, the problem with that is that more than half of the legislators and governors in the United States are Republican. And a couple of years ago, I asked states to send me information about their budgets. How were they funding their stations? So many states wrote back to me and said, we're cutting the budget to public broadcasting, we're eliminating total support for public broadcasting. I used to live in Cincinnati, and the station, Northern Kentucky University, WNKU. WNKU was a great station, and they were a free-form station, and they had played great music, and they were an institution. But the university decided that it needed money. And a lot of times, community radio stations are cash cows because that frequency is worth a lot of money. And so the university board decided to sell the station. The community tried to save the station. They weren't as successful as the people in Washington with KPOU. They were not able to save the station. And the station went off the air, and it was sold to a religious broadcaster, which, by the way, is happening a lot. A lot of religious companies are buying the frequencies of formerly operated and owned public radio stations, which is why the low-power FM stations are big deals now, because with a little bit of money and a lot of heart, you can start a hyper-focused local radio station that can stream over the internet, and those stations are like the best example of free speech in America made real through the internet or through an antenna. So I guess the last thing I want to say is stations like X-Ray, They need your support. Producers are trying to get out a message to help enhance the community, and really do your part. I mean, pledge drives are not my favorite thing, but over the course of a few years, I've come to realize how essential they are, and the way the radio stations raise money, it's really one of the few ways that actually work, and that's because they appeal to what you care about, and you care about X-Ray.
Absolutely. And if you have any thoughts on this subject, we would love to hear from you. You could just go to countrydogcitydog.fm and write into us. Share us your thoughts, and we would love to read it. And thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
And give to KXRY.
Absolutely.
I'm Don Merrill.
And I'm Kevin Levy. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. What do you think?
It was great. We kind of getting right at 29 minutes, or actually, was that 29 or did it go to 30?
It went to 29. Yeah,
Great,
29.
and that's what we want.
Yeah, so the music, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it so that I'm probably going to be able to cut it another 15 seconds or so, because I think they want the whole show to be 29 minutes.
Right.
So I'll have the music end at 29 minutes, and I'll go through and find another 10 or 15 seconds to cut out or something.
Great.
Yeah.
Woohoo. Yeah. You definitely have a lot of great knowledge on this. I mean, just again, to write a book is fascinating.
Yeah,
sure.
it was.
What kind of research did you have to do for that?
Oh, well, you can look at the bibliography and see that.
Yeah. Let me turn on the heater really quick. Like a nice warm atmosphere.